Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to give you guys just a few seconds to get online. Yeah, 1 second. If you want, you can please put your where you're zooming in from in the chat. We'd love to see that. Okay. Uh, okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Evie Sapir Bernstein, and I'm the program director at Jewish Book Council. It's so lovely to see you all here, and I'm so pleased to be able to welcome you on behalf of the Global Jewish Literary Alliance. We're thrilled to present the 2026 Global Jewish Literary Alliance Conversation with Amir Tibon and Yishay Ishi Ron, moderated by Emily Casriel. This conversation with the Global Jewish Literary Alliance is a meaningful addition to our work at Jewish Book Council of educating, enriching, and strengthening the community through Jewish literature. If you haven't already, I hope you'll purchase both of the authors' books today, The Gates of Gaza and Dog, to support their important work. Not only will they be perfect additions to your own library, but they make great gifts, and I'll be including the link soon. If you don't know what the Global Jewish Literary Alliance is, allow me to introduce you. The Global Jewish Literary Alliance aims to support a global ecosystem of Jewish arts and culture with a specific focus on the literary arts, helping writers connect to the resources they need to write Jewish books, connect readers to those works, and making sure that Jewish communities and institutions have the resources they need to create meaningful programs and events around Jewish literature. The Global Jewish Literary Alliance members are the Wingate Prize, the Jewish Book Council, the JCCA Association of North America, and the Jewish Literary Foundation. And now I'd like to introduce you to our wonderful moderator for the conversation today, Emily Casriel. Emily is an award-winning journalist, editor, and media executive who worked for over 20 years at the BBC. She developed the deep listening approach during her time as a senior visiting research fellow at King's College London's Policy Institute, building on her expertise as an accredited executive coach and workplace mediator. As well as her role at King's College, she is currently a visiting scholar at Columbia University and a trustee of the Wingate Foundation. Her latest book is Deep Listening, Transform Your Relationship with Family, Friends, and Foes, which came out last year. Lastly, please include any questions you have for Amir or Yishay into the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And I'm just going to spotlight Emily real quick, and you're going to have the conversation get started.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Evie. And really fantastic to be here and to see everybody joining us from Haifa and Toronto and Brazil and all over America and even some from London, UK, which is where I am. So lovely to have you all with us. And please, this is an interactive event, so feel free to come and give your comments in chat and I'll be able to bring them in right throughout the conversation, perhaps, or definitely at the end. So look forward to hearing your thoughts and responses. If you've already read Yishay and Amir's book, or if you are going to be so enticed by them that you're going to read it afterwards, it will be great to hear from you. So I'm really honoured to properly introduce, first of all, Amir Tibon, your award-winning diplomatic correspondent of the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. You've also been Washington, D.C. correspondent, even covered the Prime Minister's office. Before this latest award-winning book, you co-authored a biography of Mahmoud Abbas. And of course, you're the author of the 2026 Wingate Prize, which best translates the idea of Jewishness for a general reader. And the book is The Gates of Gaza, a story of betrayal, survival, and hope in Israel's borderlands. I'm also delighted to introduce Yishay Ishi Ron. And you're a former elite combat soldier. You've authored a number of books, including a children's book and a book to be published later this year, The Girl Who Rode the White Line, which I can see behind you. But we're talking today about your novel Dog, which is written in Hebrew and artfully translated by Yarden Greenspan and has been longlisted for the Israeli Sapir Literary Prize and the winner also of 2 Jewish Book Awards. So I'm very honoured to have both of you here to talk with me today. Now, these books are very different. You know, one of them is fiction. One of them is non-fiction. And yet there's many common threads that run through both. Both of them are beautifully written, they're gripping, rich, layered, and also hugely personal. Because in both of these books, there is so much at stake. So I want to begin by asking each of you to talk about a key passage in your book, which really focuses on a pivotal moment for the whole story that unfolds in these books. And Yishay, can I come to you first and to talk about a passage in the book, early on in the book, which is voiced by the central character who calls himself at this stage in his life Geller. And it looks back at his life from his current life as a heroin addict. Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, hi. First of all, it's an honor to be here, and thanks to the Alliance and to the Jewish Book Council, to you, Emily, and nice to meet you, Amir. And thanks to our audience, of course. Dog is not a war novel, okay? Maybe people would expect it to be one, but it's more of what happened when the war is over. So it deals with a very important issue now, especially after October 7th and after during this long war we are in, about PTSD, which influenced so many people in Israel and worldwide. And it's amazing that after the October 7th massacre, even the Jewish people in the diaspora are feeling PTSD. They're feeling post-traumatic. And if we are getting into the passage you're talking about, so in my book, Dog, which is not an autobiography, but it's a psychology autobiography, because I wrote it out of my PTSD, my severe PTSD, which I'm dealing with. And you're talking about a moment where the hero is feeling for the first time is feeling his PTSD. He's experiencing something which he doesn't know about himself. He suddenly feels different. He feels like he's getting mad, getting crazy. Something is wrong with his mind. And I think this is what happens usually in PTSD. There is a moment, and every warrior or everyone that was traumatized probably knows this moment when he knows that something is very wrong with him. Geller's experienced it while he's going out in Tel Aviv, and he almost shoots an innocent a teenager because he's feeling he's being chased. He hears the boots of the soldiers are behind him. And I think that, and from this point of exactly in the book, it all explodes. Meaning suddenly you are not the man you used to be. You do not recognize yourself in the mirror, and it is exactly like this. I mean, I had the same feeling when my PTSD exploded in a way that I knew that something is very, very wrong with me, and that I'm going to have to know what happened. And some people, by the way, this exact moment is very, very crucial, because it can really take them down hard, or they can start to see what's happening with them and to go to seek a treatment. And PTSD is so dangerous because a lot of the people are not seeking treatment. They are either afraid or embarrassed in this situation. Especially men are very embarrassed because they are perceived as, PTSD. I have something. I'm weak. I'm a weak man. And a minute ago I was a warrior. I was a soldier. Or so this was the moment you're talking about, Emily.
And that moment ends, very as part of the moment when this dead dog, it's a kind of emphasis on the dead dog, which seems to be a metaphor for everything that the soldier sees as being problematic, the killing of this dead dog by, as he sees it, one of his colleagues, one of his fellow soldiers. And I'm wondering why you chose this dead dog to be such a powerful metaphor for the past that the soldier Geller can't let rest.
because dogs is not only man's best friend, and of course it's a companion in war also. We have soldiers that accompanied by dogs, but I think the most important, we have two dogs in my book. One is the Gazian dog, which is a simple dog in Gaza. Is not Muslim dog, is not Hamas dog, is not an Israeli dog. Is just a dog coming for compassion and to seeking someone that will pet him and warm him, and is getting shot. And there's the Tel Aviv dog, which is, the book is told also from his perspective, because he's also a PTSD, and the readers would understand why. And the meet, the place they meet, Geller and this dog, is the place that can give them compassion and can try to give them some kind of resilience. I choose dog because not only because it's a friendly animal that most of us love and raise, but also because sometimes as human beings we cannot feel, we cannot maintain so many horror feelings and memories. We cannot contain it. We prefer, like Geller, to remember one thing which, like, he remembers, he puts all the horror he did and saw in the war, all the innocent Arabs he killed and all his friends that were killed, and he cannot, it's too hard for him to digest and to remember, so he puts it all on one single dog. It makes it easier for him to process this the war in this kind of memory.
And it's very powerful, and you talk so personally. I'm sensing that this containment through an animal is something perhaps that you've experienced. But I want to now turn to Amir, and talking about traumatic moments, I'd like you to talk about, because of course your book is about October the 7th and a whole history which comes before it. But talking about October the 7th, I'd like you to talk about a passage which encapsulates that long and hugely momentous day, which starts, as you write about it, in the morning in your kibbutz Nahal Oz in the south.
Yes, first of all, Emily, it's great to see you again. And Yishay, I'm honored to be with you two today. And I have to say, before I shift to the Gates of Gaza, that I read Yishay's book around the time it came out in Israel, which was shortly before October 7th. It was in the summer, I think, of 2023, if I'm not mistaken. And I thought it was a wonderful and very important, very difficult also and painful, but very important book back then. And today, when we speak about it, it is so relevant to the realities of, unfortunately, many, many thousands of people in Israel, and specifically young people who are coming back from this long and scarring and traumatizing war in Gaza and in Lebanon and in so many places. And I really think it's significant that this book came out right before this entire nightmare descended upon our lives. And I hope more young people who are dealing today with these hardships here in Israel will get exposed to it and read it because it's so relevant to our reality that we are seeing around us, unfortunately. And here in Israel, unfortunately, not a week passes by without very painful stories of soldiers with post-traumatic syndrome, making the news in some terrible way. So it's really an important book. And regarding the Gates of Gaza in October 7th, I'm speaking with you right now from my home in Nahal Oz. And today, maybe you can hear in the background the birds are chirping and it's quiet. And in my neighborhood, about, I would say, 70% of the population is already back to live here. In the kibbutz in general, it's around 60%. And there is a feeling that life is coming back here and that we are getting over some elements of what happened, but it will never be a complete return to what it was. And that morning, when I was right here in my house, just a few steps from where I'm sitting right now, it was 6:29 a.m. When we heard a whistle, and that's really the first sentence of the book. At first, there was only a whistle because there was no siren that morning. Among the many failures of October 7th that have yet to be properly investigated, this book starts with a rather small but significant still failure, that the siren in kibbutz Nahal Oz, in my community, which is located less than a kilometer from Gaza, it's the closest Israeli kibbutz to the Gaza border. The siren did not work. Perhaps it was overwhelmed by this initial barrage of mortars and rockets that began the attack. And we woke up, our family, from the sound of a whistle that is about to explode. And having lived in Nahal Oz for about a decade, you can say, we know to interpret these sounds. And so Miri, my wife, she kind of gave me this elbow. And she said, Amir, listen, there's a mortar. And then we got out of bed and we rushed across the hallway to the bedroom of our two young daughters. And it's also the safe room of the house, right? In every home, in places like kibbutz Nahal Oz that are close to the border, there is a room built of thick concrete that's supposed to defend you in case there is a mortar or a rocket attack. And Emily, unfortunately today, every house in Israel needs that kind of room, because what used to be unique to border communities like Nahal Oz here in the south, or like Kiryat Shmona and Metula up in the north, today is the reality of millions of Israelis following these long wars with Iran and Hezbollah and the Houthis. We've had days here where literally the entire country has to run for shelter because of missiles coming from this direction or that direction. And often when there is a siren now indicating an Iranian missile attack, for me, obviously, it immediately throws me back to that moment, to that whistle that begins the book. And that begins the story that has not ended yet, the story of the October 7 war.
And you
Amir,
write...
it's amazing. If I
Yeah, go
just
on,
want to
Yishay.
say to Amir, I just want to say to Amir that the reason I haven't read Amir's book is because this day, although I wasn't in the South, it was, I think, one of my worst days in my life. And I'm doing psychotherapy, and I have a psychiatrist and I have a therapist, and I remember that in those days of near October 7th, all my meetings were just crying. I couldn't, it was so intense, and seeing and feeling and watching and hearing all our people are being slaughtered in this day and some days afterward, and all those soldiers being killed. And since then, what's happening in Israel is, and by the way, it's not only in Israel, what's happening in the world, we feel unsafe everywhere as Jews and as Israelis. And I remember this, and I just can't read those books. I mean, these materials are triggering me in such a horror way that it's even hearing Amir, it's amazing. I'm so honored to see you and meet you, and really, you guys are so brave of what you went through and how you got out, and it's crazy. It's like it's in my eyes as a PTSD author, I'm like, I can't even touch those materials, which are so intense.
Well,
Well,
thank you for
Yishay,
being on.
I'll just say the good thing about a book is that it's not going anywhere. Unlike because I come also from the world of news, right? So one of the problems in the world of news is you can have a wonderful story, an important scoop, a great analysis, but people read it, the day it's published and maybe the day after. And if it's like a long magazine story, they'll read it over the weekend and then it gets washed away. but a book stays. And sometimes people will tell me, I haven't been able to read your book, or I started and I couldn't go on because it was too painful or the tension was too strong. And I always tell them, okay, take your time. You can read it a year from today, 10 years from today. That's the power of books, that they are here to stay.
Yeah, and it's amazing that you wrote it and documented what you passed as a family.
Yeah, it was very, very powerful, Amir. I agree with you, Yishay, and the story that you went through. And I know you've not yet read it, and I'm sure you will when the moment is right, Yishay. But the passage you're describing in the beginning of the book, it's kind of supreme vulnerability of you being shut in this safe room. And to me, it was most powerfully evoked when you talked about the kid's stroller outside your home. And the image in my mind, not almost more than your children themselves, of this stroller sitting and knowing that these Hamas guys were outside and that was no protection. And you write the whole book very, very cleanly without much emotion, even though surely what you experienced then was hugely emotional, and perhaps because of your need to survive, you put that emotion aside. Was it very intentional to write it in a very clean way?
First of all, maybe that's one of my weaknesses as a journalist, but that is simply my style of writing. But the way I was raised, you can say, as a writer, is to report the facts and to keep it as short and precise as possible. And that's what I did in my previous book, The Last Palestinian, the biography of Mahmoud Abbas. And that's what I've been doing all these years at Haaretz and other places. And so when I came to write The Gates of Gaza, it was my obvious choice to write it this way. And another thing that I think you got absolutely correct, Emily, is that during those long hours, there was very little room for emotion because we were trying to survive. And because we had our two young daughters with us, Galia was 3.5 years old at the time, Carmel was 1 year and 9 months old. So Miri and I, in this dark room with no electricity, no light, no food, when our house is being fired upon and terrorists are trying to break in, we had to be extremely focused. It was tunnel vision, and we couldn't allow our emotion to overcome the mission. And there is one moment that I mentioned in the book where we do kind of make space for emotions. It's a bit around the middle of the book when the girls finally fall asleep. And that's when we were able to kind of take off our guard and deal with this emotional burden. But most of the time we were focused on survival. We couldn't allow ourselves to be dragged down by fear and anger and disappointment and all these other feelings that emerged later.
Yeah, that's it's certainly, you get the sense of that. And the way that the sort of clean journalistic way where you don't talk much about what's going on inside is in contrast with the novel that you've written, Yishay, because there's a lot of self-reflection. The character Geller, we hear, his feelings, his behavior, and we feel his feelings on the inside. And you write at one point in his voice, I used to be as strong as basalt, the rock. Most of the time I was content, too foolish to recognize my own sadness. And at the heart of the book, it feels like Geller is both running away from trauma and at the same time learning to touch its edges, perhaps through his dog. And I'm wondering about your thought process with how you worked through what Geller was able to say and acknowledge at different moments.
I think Geller, by the way, maybe the audience is curious about the name Geller. Geller was this magician slash mentalist. He was very successful during the 70s as bending spoons with the power of his mind. And my protagonist feels that he lost everything at the moment. He lost his self-respect, he lost his his life, his apartment. He lives on the street. He's a drug addict. He lost his father, which was really someone who he looked up to and went after his ways. His father was a general in Golani. And Geller is in such a low place at the book that he feels that there is nothing that can pull him out of it. And he remembers this video which he saw Uri Geller bending a spoon with the power of his mind. And he suddenly has this thought that maybe if he succeed in bending a spoon, not as a ritual, but as a practice, a daily practice, after he's taking his heroin, he sits in this sofa in this dump in Tel Aviv, and he's trying to bend the spoon. He talks to the spoon, he's asking her, and he feels that if he will succeed, that would be like a ladder out. That would be, he can pull himself out of this situation. He says, I will be like a god, I will be able to get out of this situation. And that's explained to us how deep ones can feel in this PTSD, okay, in this mental breakdown, which you lose everything because you lose yourself. Suddenly you experience those amazing, horrifying situation, and you suddenly shout at night, or you suddenly disassociate in the middle of the street, or you get anxiety or panic attacks everywhere. And it's something that is so hard to deal with. You are not the person you've been a moment ago. Like a day before, you were hanging around, smoking with your friends, drinking beers, doing everything, and suddenly you're a wreck. And dealing with it sometimes is almost feel like impossible. And so many people, so many men, or not only men, women also, they just raise their hands and they just feel that they cannot get out of this place. And because they are sometimes are embarrassed of what's happening to them and of this weakness, but it's not a weakness. It's something it's like an injury. Okay, until our society started to understand that PTSD is an injury like losing an arm or losing a leg, people were feeling that they were cowards because they were treated by the system, by the Ministry of Defense, by the army, by their friends as cowards. And I think a lot of change in the last few years in how we see PTSD in soldiers. And I think my voice in the book, and this is why I'm very happy that Dog won those prizes and become international book, because I think PTSD is not only part of us veterans. There are so many women that are PTSD of sexual attacks, and there are so many children that are PTSD because of the countries they live in, because of the family they are growing in. So PTSD is probably one of the worst pandemic that is hitting the world, and especially now we feel it in Israel, I think everywhere. As Amir described it, you run from missiles from the north to missiles from the south. You don't know, you don't know what disaster you are waking up for
Israeli roulette, basically. It's Israeli roulette, our life in the last 2.5 years.
And I think yes, sure. No, Emily, yeah.
No, I mean, you talk so eloquently about PTSD and trauma itself You know, I'm thinking about the impact that it has on time and our understanding of time. And both of your books use a lot of time shifting. History is consistently jumping in your book, Yishay, between the present that this hero of the book, Geller, the protagonist, is experiencing as a junkie, and his past in Gaza. And Amir, in your book, you shift between the history of the day as things close around you and you hear what's happening with your fellow kibbutzniks, and at the same time your parents hear the siren that you send them and come to try and rescue you. And at the same time as that story, all in one day, there's the history of Israel seen through the history of the kibbutz. And it's a sense of generations and trauma kind of enabling you to access different times, bringing them together both insightfully and also incredibly uncomfortably. And I'm wondering if that's something both of you thought about. And I'll turn first to you, Amir.
So the reason I did it this way in the Gates of Gaza, where for every chapter about October 7, there is then a history chapter that, like you said, Emily, tells the history of Nahal Oz, and through the history of Nahal Oz actually tells the history of Israel and Gaza. I did it for three reasons. Reason number one is when I started writing the October 7 chapters, I realized that there was so much context that had to be provided so that readers all over the world, and remember, this is a book that I wrote in English originally. I later translated it into Hebrew and it was translated into other languages, but the English is the original text. And I wanted it to reach an international audience. And I realized that people will have so many questions as they read the book. For example, why would you go and live there? Why would anybody choose to live on this hot, dangerous border? And who are these people that were attacked? And what was their prior relationship with their neighbors in Gaza? And who is this Hamas organization? And how are they related to this Netanyahu figure in Israel? And so I had to include a lot of history, and I said it's better to actually separate it than to constantly, within the October 7 chapters, have to start explaining. So that was reason number one. Reason number two, because it created cliffhangers. And, I think people needed this moment to breathe, because otherwise it's just this endless tension. Okay, the terrorists come in and the local security crew of the kibbutz engages them, and my next door neighbor, we don't know if he's dead or alive, and the kids are crying, and my parents are on their way, and they rescue these other. So you need a moment to digest all of that and breathe. And so the history chapters are also an important buffer emotionally. And the third reason is because I genuinely believe that if you don't understand the history, you don't understand October 7. I know there are many books that are about October 7 and they are only within October 7, and I respect that, and I don't want to argue with anyone's choice, but I think that it's important to put this terrible day within the longer timeline of a bloody, terrible conflict between two nations, because that's really what it is. It's a day that represents the most awful and painful and terrible consequence of this conflict. And without understanding all the history, you don't fully grasp its significance. So that's why I made this choice. And I also have to say that the historical chapters were more difficult to write than the October 7 chapters. I mean, emotionally, October 7 was difficult to write, but the story kind of tells itself. And my editor at Little Brown and Company, Alex Littlefield, when I presented to him this back and forth format, he said, okay, I agree, it's a smart format, but he gave me one condition, and this is a very American way to frame things. I think our followers in the US, maybe also in the UK, will understand. He said, the historical chapters should not feel like you have to eat your vegetables. In Israel, you don't tell your kids that they have to eat their vegetables. Israeli kids usually like vegetables.
Well, that's because your vegetables are bloody nice, because they're
I know.
So
My girls, they love cucumbers and they love carrots and red peppers and kohlrabi and all of that. But I realized what he meant is that, in order for people to actually read the history and not just skip it and they want to get back to the October 7th chapter, they have to be very, very interesting. And that's why I chose to build them around personal stories of people from the kibbutz. So it's not like, oh, and then Rabin was murdered. It's like literally a person from the kibbutz who was in the rally in Tel Aviv when Rabin was murdered. And that's how it's being told.
And I
It's
wanted to just
amazing.
stay on the history for a moment because, you very chose intentionally the title of the book to talk about a history that hasn't been so well publicized about a big war hero in Israel and something very prescient that he said at the kibbutz in a speech. Would you like to tell us this story? Because I think it's an important story about the history of Israel, which is not often told.
So the title of the book is a reference to a very famous speech that Moshe Dayan, probably the most famous general in Israeli history, gave at the cemetery of Kibbutz Nahal Oz in 1956. Actually, just a few weeks ago, we marked 70 years to that speech. It was in April 56. It was the first funeral in this young kibbutz, because Nahal Oz was only founded in 1953. And I tell this story in the second chapter of the book, which is the first historical chapter, right? The book begins with the morning of October 7, and it ends at kind of very tense moment. And then we shift back to the 1950s, the foundation of the kibbutz. And then there is this incident, this border incident, where a young member of the kibbutz is shot and killed by Egyptian soldiers, because remember, at the time, Gaza is under Egyptian control. And after his body gets taken, kidnapped by the Egyptians, eventually it returns to the kibbutz, and then there is a funeral, and Moshe Dayan, the chief of staff of the Israeli military, he has a personal connection to this young kibbutz. He was actually the man who gave the order to build it on the border with Gaza, because this was part of the security policy or national security policy of Israel at the time that prioritized communal life on the border. This was part of this approach that in order to maintain the new borders of the young state of Israel, we need civilian communities along those borders. And by the way, this is huge parenthesis, but today, that very policy is being put under immense strain because we are failing as a country to protect the border communities along the border with Gaza, along the border with Lebanon in the north. This is our weak point. But anyway, Dayan, because of his connection to this young kibbutz on the border, he comes to this funeral, the first funeral of Kibbutz Nahal Oz, and he gives this defining speech. Some would describe it as a really kind of monumental speech of the Zionist ideology. And he mentions in that speech the heavy gates of Gaza that the young people in this kibbutz are carrying on their shoulders. And of course, that by itself is a reference to the biblical story of Samson, who carried the gates of the Philistine city of Gaza on his shoulders. So it's a reference wrapped in a reference, goes back to the Bible. And yes, Emily, this exactly, I think, connects to my earlier point that you cannot understand what is Nahal Oz, what is life on the border, what is Israel and Gaza if you don't go back to those stories of history.
But also in that
they
speech,
say
just
now,
tell us, I just want to capture this thought and then I'll come to you, Yishay, because I think it's really important that Dayan didn't just say that. He also said, I'm quoting from your book, why should we question their burning hatred for us? For 8 years, they have been sitting in the refugees camps in Gaza, and before their eyes, we've been transforming the lands and the villages where they and their fathers dwelt into our estate. And that is perhaps also prescient.
It was a radical speech in both directions. It was radical in how pessimistic it was, because basically the bottom line of his speech is we are always going to be at war. We always have to be ready to fight. They are never going to come to terms with our presence here. And we are basically, this is the destiny of our generation to always fight. But it was also radical in those sentences that recognize the Palestinian Nakba of 1948 and their displacement and suffering and desire for revenge. And the last thing I will say about this is, 20 years after he gave that speech, Dayan was one of the architects of the Israeli peace agreement with Egypt. So people change as well.
Yeah, and picking up on this point, there's a very interesting question here in the chat from Galina Vromen to you, Yishay, and it says, and it asks about how your personal experiences impact the way you see the other side, whether your own pain, your own PTSD make it impossible to empathize with Palestinians or Gazans or Arab soldiers or civilians, or does it make it possible for you to imagine the pain and their PTSD?
Basically, I don't think that PTSD influence a political point of view as general, but but for sure it influenced the way you emphasize and see others people's pain and suffering. And PTSD is not ours to have as Israelis only. Of course, the Palestinians suffer PTSD, the children suffer on both sides, and people as general in society suffer from PTSD. So I don't think putting it in a political perspective is correct, but putting it in a moral and the options to feel others people pain and suffering is, for at least from my experience, is something which give me a other perspective. And I can also tell you that in the last few years, there's a line of research in PTSD which is called moral injuries, which it means that you don't have to be really involved in horror, horrific deeds, or to experience yourself shooting at others or directly seeing what happens in war, but you can either being exposed, even sometimes on the radio net, or even just by hearing your peers talk about what happened to them and what they did during the war, and because it contradicts with your inner morals, then it can hurt you, it can injure your inner self. So it is a very strong research now, a moral injury, which talks exactly about this, about how things can injure us, even if it's just hurting our our inner self, not doing anything, just hearing stuff or seeing stuff or being near people that are doing things that are not that contradict our morals.
But I'm wondering, in a way, for both of you, after what you've both experienced in, big traumatic things in very different ways, about how and whether that changes your ability to empathize with the other side, with people on the other side of a border.
I think war is bad and anyone can understand it. And I think the whole society, most of societies in Israel now is more right-wing, meaning they are more, it is very difficult for the population in Israel to trust and to build some expectation of peace, because we are not only we are in a constant war due to many issues, political issues and other stuff since October 7th, but I think because what happened to us and what happened to the people in the South, especially in this day, those atrocities, those rapes, those massacre, it was something that we haven't seen before since the pogroms or since what the Nazis did to us. So I think it is very hard for us now to see the other side, although I think we should understand and see the pain in all over, but as Israelis, it becomes more difficult for us, of course.
Thoughts from you, Amir?
First of all, I agree with what Yishay said, and I will add to it. If you ask me who is to blame for this terrible situation, basically a kilometer from here in Gaza, and it's really a terrible, terrible, painful, horrendous situation. And if you ask me who is to blame for it, I blame Hamas first and foremost, because if Hamas had not carried out the October 7 attack, none of this would have happened. Having said that, while I blame Hamas for what happened, I also can sympathize with the pain of a family over there that lost their home, that somebody in the family, God forbid, was killed or injured, that they are experiencing trauma and pain and fear. And the political element of it is not overclouding, I hope, the ability to feel pain and to feel sorry and to really understand that people there are going through hell. So that's the first point. The second point, as a resident of this area and someone who believes in this part of Israel, I don't want Gaza to be Somalia. I don't want people there to live now for decades in rubble and have a cholera develop there and children not go to school and they only learn terrible things about the Jews and develop their desire for the next big act of revenge. If that's the result of the war, then we are just counting down to the next one. And I think there is an opportunity to actually grow from this abyss that we have reached and to make things better. And I think it's in our interest to be able to look toward a better future. I want to raise my kids here, okay? And I want to raise them in a secure place and in a safe place, and that requires that we will have a strong military and that we will never be surprised again. But it also means that if there is an opening to make things better, to improve our life through making some kind of an arrangement, not with Hamas, of course, but with a different Palestinian government, with the involvement of the neighboring Arab countries that would like to improve the situation, we should do it. And if we go back to Dayan's speech, Emily, and this very bleak outlook that he presented here in Nahal Oz, I also, I will say it for the second time, but it's an important point. The same Dayan, 21 years later, decided to be, one of the most forceful voices. He was the foreign minister in Menachem Begin's government, one of the most, determined voices for the peace agreement with Egypt. And that peace agreement has spared us the possibility of several more wars with the Egyptian military, and God knows how many lives were saved because of it, and how many resources were diverted from more military buildup to better education and better healthcare for the Israeli people. So we also have to remember that.
Yeah, and talking about hope, Yishay, your book isn't all, people should be encouraged to read it because it's not all dismal. It is also uplifting. There are moments of hope because the key character, Geller, who's struggling with his own family, his father in a coma after a stroke, his mother, he finds it hard to connect. But he does, you were talking about trust, Amir, and so were you, Yishay, and the difficulty of establishing trust. But despite everything and despite his heroin addiction, he finds it possible to establish a relationship of trust with Oved, a barista, who always has a coffee for him. And then in a moment of extreme crisis, with a kindly woman who has a wide face, Dorit, who takes care of his dog and who cares about him. And in a way, the fact that she is able to show him some motherly love allows us as the reader also to connect with him and see he too is worthy of that love. And I thought that was very beautiful. And I'm wondering about your thoughts behind writing that hopefulness, Yishay.
Mm-hmm. Doris is I love this character. I love to write. It was very intriguing to write her because she's also PTSD. She had her traumas, and she lives in the sides of society. She's like from She belongs to the south side of Tel Aviv, of the unseen people, of the weak people. And I think this is what enables her, and it connects us to our last discussion about how can we empathize with other people's weakness if you are a PTSD, because when she is living like this and she is weak also, it enables her to see Geller as a person, as a human being, while other sees him mostly as a drug addict, and they will call the police on him instead of like calling the social security or the people that will help him. We are used to seeing those people and try not to step on them and try to go to the other side. And Doris sees him as a human being, and this is before she knows he's a decorated officer in the army and he's good looking, and she has some kind of a relationship with him that she's not sure if she's attracted to him or she's like a mom to him because she lost a son also. So I think that the connection with Doris gives us hope for the story, and it also, I think, for me as a writer, I'm talking about something which calls tikkun olam, and I think that if any of us, each of us sees the weak people in society, okay, and not only, I'm not talking about only PTSD, but about, no one chooses to be a homeless, and no one chooses to be a prostitute in the street, and no one chooses to be a drug addict. They are all people that went through probably big traumas in their life that put them in those situations, these weak, transparent positions in society. And for us as people living in society, it's tikkun olam to give a smile, to give a hot meal, to have a chat with someone like this, and to know that it's not like Geller is talking about, they are not even afraid of me. He's saying they are repulsive of me, like they are disgust of him. And this is, I think, something which happens to us. We come to the bad part of the city and we see those junkies, and usually we are even not afraid of them, but we are disgust of them, and we just don't want to meet them. And I think it can give us a little bit the place we live in, and Earth can be a much better place if all of us can be a little better human beings with those people.
Thank you. That's a beautiful invitation. And I'm aware that we're running out of time, and I'm just looking at some questions. And I just wanted to ask another just quick, brief question to you, Yishay, about somebody, Jennifer Lentz, saying that chapter 2 really hooked her when we changed perspective to the dog. We're actually, hearing the voice of a dog. This is the dog in Tel Aviv, not the dog in Gaza. And she asks if you went into planning to write from the perspective of a dog, or whether this unfolded in your writing process.
Because I'm a writer, unlike Amir, which is a reporter, and which is, by the way, amazing hearing you, because most of the stuff I heard from October 7th were very traumatic and were very emotional. And hearing you talking about it, and you were in the center of what happened, and you could have lost your family, and you talk about it in a way like a reporter, in a way that in the perspective of Nahal Oz and and the settlements in the border and what happened in Gaza, and it's a great thing to hear you give me a perspective. And I think when I write as a fiction writer, I know where I start and I have no idea where it will happen. Sometimes the story leads me, sometimes the protagonist leads me, sometimes I'm surprised of what happened to them. And I think it just happened. I mean, I knew that I need another voice because telling only from a PTSD point of view of my protagonist, which was actually myself in some kind of a way, was not easy for me. And I needed another voice that would be a distance voice. It's easier to speak about someone else's PTSD or cruel life, you know, what happened to him, than speaking out of your own experience. And as a writer, it was something that just happened. And it was very, for me, it was suddenly, you know, like, wow, telling it from a point of view of a dog is very interesting as well.
Yeah, it really was interesting. And so another person, Nina Maugilnik, has remarked on also, Amir, you talk about your dog and leaving your dog behind and the kind of the power and the passion that you have. A dog is a beautiful parallel between both of your books, and your intense love for your kibbutz comes across so strongly. And I'm just briefly wondering, Amir, how the process of writing the book and the huge love you have both for the kibbutz and for Israel, how the process of writing it has changed, if in any way, your identity as an Israeli.
So first of all, yes, there is a dog in the Gates of Gaza, and I'm not going to say much more because it's one of the interesting plot twists in the story. You know, he appears in the beginning and comes back later. So Pluto, our Labrador. Regarding this, you know, love for Nahal Oz and love for Israel, I think they come from the same place. And I know this is a word that has gotten, let's say, out of fashion recently, to say the least, but I use it anyway, and that's how I describe myself. It's Zionism. Not the Zionism of certain elements in the Israeli government today, not a Zionism that tries to cancel the aspirations of other people here in this region. But simply Zionism, I think, at its core, which is that the Jewish people need to have their place in this world, and a place that is the homeland of the Jewish people, and also the insurance policy of every Jewish person out there in the world. And I think it's extremely important for Israel, but also more generally, that Jewish communities will continue to thrive and prosper in the United States and in the UK and in Australia, but also that the Jewish people need a national home. And Nahal Oz was founded here on the border as part of a strategy and a belief that protecting the borders of this country is very important for protecting this project called the State of Israel. And I share that belief. And I also think that at the same time, the Zionist movement, the way I understand it, and my Zionist identity, always had an aspiration to become part of this region and find the way to live in peace with the neighbors, with the people who we have been fighting wars with for so many years, but we have to share a land and a region with at the same time. And that's the love that you are referring to, Emily. That's what brought me here, and that's what brought me to write this book.
Well, thank you so very much, Amir Tibon and Yishay Ishi Ron. It's been such a privilege to talk to you, and I hope also for everybody who's been listening in. And I'm so sorry we didn't have time to read some of the really thoughtful questions that have come in the chat. Both of your passion for, you know, the trauma about what you've experienced, but also your hope for tikkun olam, and as it comes across very, very cleanly and beautifully. And Yishay, your beautiful invitation for all of us to look a bit more at the people who are transparent, you write, you say, people who are being ignored, both in our societies and perhaps in societies elsewhere as well, who are ignored by our side. It's a beautiful invitation. And these books are really compelling and illuminating. And I very, very strongly recommend them to everybody who hasn't had an opportunity to read them yet. Thank you so much. And back to you, Evie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this incredible event. And we hope to see you all at other events, either virtually or in person. Thank you, Amir and Yishay. We so appreciate you for taking the time and sharing your experience with us today.
Thank you.
To learn more about the Global Jewish Literary Alliance, Jewish Book Council, the Wingate Prize, JCCA Association, and the Jewish Literary Foundation, please see the links in the chat. Thank you all so, so much. Amir, Yishay, thank you so much. Emily, an incredible conversation as always. You're wonderful and we appreciate you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.